Experian Design Group inspected the cracked pier twice, developed repair plans, watched workers remove load-bearing bricks without permits or shoring, and never told them to stop, never reported the unsafe condition, never identified the pier as load-bearing. 1 hour before the collapse, an engineer texted, quote, "Put the bricks back," but didn't communicate urgency, didn't say evacuate. Willis Moore died waiting for those bricks to be replaced. April 18, 2023, 4:04 p.m. Lower Manhattan. A parking garage worker climbed into a vehicle on the roof of 57 Ann Street, backed it into the drive aisle, drove it past a brick pier that had been gutted throughout the day. Below him, on the second floor, Willis Moore was finishing his shift. The 59-year-old manager had worked at this garage for more than a decade. He knew every column, every crack, every patch job they'd done over the years. He didn't know that the pier directly beneath the roof, the one holding up everything above the second floor, had been systematically dismantled. The bricks that should have been there, gone, removed by workers trying to make repairs, workers who thought they were uncovering a steel column. There was no steel column. Just bricks, load-bearing bricks, and now, not enough of them. The vehicle's weight, concentrated through the roof girder, transferred down through what remained of the pier, crushed the last bricks holding everything up. The pier failed. Then the floor above failed. Then the floor above that. 3 floors pancaked onto the second floor where Willis Moore was standing. He died instantly, crushed under tons of concrete and steel and vehicles. 6 other workers were injured. 1 fell from the second floor to the first, another was trapped on an upper floor. All survived. But Willis Moore, he never had a chance. And the worst part, the most infuriating part. This was entirely preventable. If you want to hear how professional engineers, licensed inspectors, and regulatory systems all failed simultaneously, hit subscribe. We cover the disasters that should never have happened. The parking garage at 57 Ann Street was old. Built in 1925, 98 years of wear, 98 years of vehicles, 98 years of water damage and freeze-thaw cycles and deferred maintenance. The building was a relic of early 20th century construction, cinder concrete slabs reinforced with welded wire fabric, concrete encased steel beams, internal concrete encased steel columns, perimeter unreinforced load-bearing walls, and brick load-bearing piers, solid brick columns that carried concentrated loads from the upper floors down to the foundation. These weren't decorative, these were structural, the bones of the building. The structure received its certificate of occupancy in 1957 to operate as a parking garage, more than 5 automobiles per level, 10 people per floor at a time, passenger car type vehicles only on the roof. That last part, critical, passenger car type vehicles. Not SUVs, not heavy trucks, light passenger cars from the 1950s, which weighed maybe 3,000 pounds. Modern SUVs, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 pounds. But nobody was enforcing that limitation. The building had a history, a long history of violations. 2003, the Department of Buildings found concrete defects in the stairs, cracks in the first floor ceiling, spalling concrete, steel beams with missing concrete coverings, defective concrete with exposed cracks. 2009, broken stairs, loose concrete in numerous areas, and critically, the garage was cited for exceeding its capacity. 2011, an inspection noted that permitted repair work was ongoing, that interior maintenance was in good condition, but were the repairs from 2003 actually completed, or just documented as ongoing? 2013, improper exit door issues. Between 1976 and 2023, 64 building code violations were issued to the garage's owner, 57 Ann Street Realty Association. 64 violations, over 47 years. Some were resolved, some defaulted, some just lingered. And here's the critical failure, the regulatory gap that killed Willis Moore. The garage was scheduled to be inspected by the Department of Buildings before the end of 2023. Under Local Law 126 of 2021, all parking structures in New York City needed to undergo enhanced inspection by 2027. The Ann Street garage, due for its first inspection in 9 months. 9 months. If that inspection had happened in January instead of December, Willis Moore would probably still be alive. But the regulatory timeline, the inspection cycle, the bureaucratic schedule, it all lined up wrong. Garfield Panton had worked at the Ann Street garage. He'd been hired by Willis Moore back in the 1990s. They were close friends. He knew the building's condition intimately. We always had to patch up the building, take down concrete and patch it back up. Pieces of the building was falling down, but we'd just patch it back up. That was the maintenance strategy. Patch, not repair, not replace, patch. When concrete spalled, patch it. When cracks appeared, patch them. When pieces fell, patch the hole. It was like putting band-aids on compound fractures. And everyone knew it. But here's where the story takes its fatal turn. Sometime in 2022, Little Man Parking, the company operating the garage, recognized they had a problem. The brick piers, the solid brick columns supporting the third floor, they were cracking, visibly deteriorating. So they did the responsible thing, they hired professional engineers. Experian Design Group, a New York-based architecture and engineering firm, was brought in to inspect the garage, assess the damage, develop repair plans. This should have been the moment where professional expertise caught the problem, where licensed engineers identified the hazard, where the system worked. It wasn't. Experian Design Group conducted multiple inspections in 2022 and 2023. They examined the cracked piers, photographed them, documented the deterioration. They developed repair plans, drew up specifications, identified areas that needed attention. But they made a critical error. An error that would kill Willis Moore. They failed to properly identify the brick piers as load-bearing. They looked at these solid brick columns, these structural elements holding up 3 floors, and somehow didn't recognize them as critical to the building's structural integrity. How does that happen? How do professional engineers, licensed to practice structural engineering in New York, miss something so fundamental? The investigation report would later reveal the assumption. Experian Design Group incorrectly assumed that a structural steel column was inside the brick encasement. They thought the bricks were just covering, protection for a steel column that was doing the actual load-bearing work. That's a reasonable assumption in many buildings. Concrete encased steel columns are common. The concrete protects the steel carries the load. But these piers, they were built in 1925, when construction methods were different, when solid brick load-bearing construction was standard. There was no steel column inside. Just bricks, mortar, and now, cracks. And based on this incorrect assumption, Experian developed repair plans that didn't account for the piers being load-bearing. Plans that didn't require shoring, didn't require temporary support, didn't require careful sequencing of the work. Plans that basically said, take out the damaged bricks, replace them with new ones. Simple, right? Except when what you're removing is holding up the building. Meanwhile, the original construction from 1925 had its own fatal flaw. The investigation found that during the initial construction, certain load-bearing piers were not properly connected to the adjacent party wall. The party wall, that's the shared wall between 57 Ann Street and the neighboring building. These piers, these critical structural elements, should have been integrated into that wall, tied into it, connected for stability and load distribution. They weren't. They stood alone, freestanding, carrying their loads independently, which made them more vulnerable to deterioration, more susceptible to moisture exposure, more prone to cracking. Over the course of decades, this long-term progressive deterioration of the brick pier caused significant cracks in the masonry. Water got in, froze, expanded, cracked the bricks further, corroded any metal ties, degraded the mortar. Feedback loop, each winter made it worse, each year the cracks grew, each decade the structural capacity diminished. By 2023, these piers were compromised, weakened, operating well below their design capacity. But they were still standing, still carrying loads, still doing their job. Barely. Starting in March 2023, employees of Little Man Parking were directed to begin repairs. Not by licensed contractors, not by structural engineers on site, by parking garage workers. Workers who'd been told, the bricks are damaged, remove the damaged ones, replace them with new bricks. Simple repair work, right? The workers did what they were told. They started removing damaged bricks and mortar from the load-bearing pier. Over the course of several weeks, they chipped away at it, taking out cracked bricks, crumbling mortar, pieces that looked unsound. They didn't install any shoring, any temporary supports, any bracing. Why would they? They thought they were doing cosmetic repairs, fixing surface damage. Nobody told them, you're dismantling a structural column. Nobody said, every brick you remove makes this building less stable. Nobody explained, this pier is holding up 3 floors of concrete and steel and vehicles. The work was performed without approved engineering plans, without Department of Buildings permits, without any of the safety protocols required for structural modifications. Because nobody understood, this was structural modification. And here's where Experian Design Group's failure becomes criminal negligence. On 2 separate occasions, engineers from Experian Design Group conducted field inspections of the garage. They visited the site, they walked through, they observed the work in progress. And they saw workers removing bricks from the pier. They saw unpermitted demolition, they saw unshored structural work, they saw an immediately hazardous condition. And they did nothing. They didn't stop the work, they didn't notify the Department of Buildings, they didn't issue an unsafe condition designation. They watched, documented, moved on. The law is clear. Engineers who observe unsafe conditions have a duty to report them to the building department, to the property owner, to anyone who will listen. Experian Design Group failed that duty twice. Dana Friedman was a lawyer from Kew Gardens who parked at the Ann Street garage regularly. He saw an inspection going on in March 2023, about a month before the collapse. Someone was there, looking at something, taking notes. He assumed it was routine. It wasn't routine. It was Experian, observing the brick removal, and saying nothing. The garage manager, Willis Moore, he was trying to do the right thing. When he saw the hole developing in the pier, when he saw how much brick had been removed, he took a photograph. And he texted it to a project manager at Experian Design Group. Look at this. This is what the workers have done. Is this okay? He was asking for professional guidance, for engineering judgment, for someone with expertise to tell him, should we be worried? The photograph showed a gaping hole in what was supposed to be a solid brick pier. You could see deep into the column where load-bearing bricks used to be. The Experian project manager responded, "Put the bricks back." That's it. 3 words. Put the bricks back. No sense of urgency, no explanation of why, no directive to stop all work immediately and evacuate the building. Just put them back. The manager didn't communicate. This is an emergency. This building could collapse. Get everyone out now. He said, put the bricks back. As if this was a minor issue, something to address when convenient, a cosmetic concern. This text exchange, it happened approximately 1 hour before the collapse. 1 hour. Willis Moore received that message, probably thought, okay, we'll get to it. We'll have the workers replace those bricks, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. He didn't know, he had 1 hour. April 18, 2023, the day started normally. The garage opened for business, vehicles came and went, workers parked cars, customers retrieved their vehicles. Around 9 a.m., workers employed by Little Man Parking returned to the damaged pier. They removed additional bricks, more than they'd removed on any previous day, creating a larger hole, a weaker structure, a column on the verge of failure. They worked through the morning, through lunch, into the afternoon. Nobody stopped them, nobody questioned what they were doing, nobody realized they were dismantling the building 1 brick at a time. The second floor, where Willis Moore's office was located, where he managed the day-to-day operations, it was directly supported by these piers. Above the second floor, the third floor, then the roof. On the roof, approximately 40 to 50 vehicles, some sources said more, including multiple SUVs. Remember, the 1957 certificate of occupancy, passenger car type vehicles only on the roof. Modern SUVs weigh substantially more than 1950s passenger cars, maybe 50 to 75% more. The roof was overloaded, had been for years, but the structure had tolerated it, margins of safety built into the original design, conservative engineering, they'd been absorbing the excess load. But now, with the piers weakened, with bricks removed, those safety margins gone. The structure was operating at its absolute limit. Any additional stress, any change in loading, any vibration, something would give. At approximately 4:04 p.m., a Little Man Parking employee entered a vehicle on the roof. Just part of his job, moving cars around, reparking them, making room, standard garage operations. He backed the vehicle into the drive aisle, drove it past the damaged pier. The pier, with the gaping hole, with load-bearing bricks removed, with minimal structural capacity remaining. The vehicle's weight, maybe 5,000 pounds, transferred through the roof structure, down through the girder, concentrated onto the pier. The remaining bricks and mortar, they couldn't handle it. The bearing stresses, the crushing forces, they exceeded the material capacity. The bricks crushed. The mortar failed. The pier collapsed. Not slowly, not with warning, instantaneously. One moment, the pier was standing, compromised but functional. The next moment, it ceased to exist as a structural element. The third floor girder, the beam carrying the load from above, it dropped, several inches, maybe a foot. That created a void, above the girder, a gap where the pier used to be. The upper story of the pier, the bricks above the third floor, they lost support, they pancaked down. The floor system, designed to be supported continuously, now supported inadequately, it failed. The third floor, punched through, falling onto the second floor. The impact load, the dynamic force of a falling floor, far exceeded what the second floor was designed to carry. The second floor failed, pancaked onto the first floor. The entire center section of the building collapsed. The collapse sequence, maybe 10 seconds, start to finish. But for Willis Moore, time stopped at second 1. He was in his office, on the second floor, when 3 floors fell on him. Concrete, steel, vehicles, debris, tons of material, falling from above. He had no chance to run, no time to react, no warning. Students at nearby Pace University heard it. A large noise, a big rumbling, like an earthquake, screams. The ground shook, buildings vibrated, dust clouds exploded outward. Office workers in adjacent buildings, they felt it. Rachel Martinez was working in a building next door. My desk started shaking, then this roar, like, I don't know, like a building coming apart, because that's what it was. I ran to the window, saw this grey cloud, billowing out, dust and debris, cars' alarms going off, people running. The FDNY received the call at 4:15 p.m. Building collapse, multiple vehicles, unknown number of occupants. They dispatched 4 engine companies, 3 ladder companies, 2 rescue companies, battalion chief, deputy chief. The response was immediate, massive, overwhelming. Within blocks, people heard it, felt it, saw it. Gabriel Yahudayev was working at a barbershop nearby. We heard a really big boom, like something out of the ordinary. It was just a really loud noise, like something exploded. I saw people running out quickly from the scene. It was insane. Everyone was scared. Everyone thought that was their last time being alive. Jim Slattery had just exited the parking garage moments before. He'd retrieved his car, driven down the ramp, pulled out onto Ann Street, maybe 3 minutes before the collapse. I didn't think about it much before, but now it's starting to hit home. I had no idea a collapse had occurred. I was lucky today. Lucky is an understatement. He missed death by 3 minutes. At Pace University, classes were in session, students in buildings adjacent to the garage. Liam Gator was in class when it happened. It felt like an earthquake, a large noise and a big rumbling, and then we all got evacuated. Another Pace student described the moment. All of a sudden we hear this huge, loud noise. People were running towards it. People were running away from it. People were crying. We looked in and saw rubble and cars and stuff. Christina Gazzano and Jordan Hebron lived in the Pace dorm. Their bedroom window looked directly at the garage. I'm pretty nervous about going back up into the dorm since we both live right next door, especially on the side of the building that we're on. We can physically see this garage. We can see it looking down from my bedroom window. One PACE student witnessed the collapse sequence itself. They saw the garage's concrete floors fall on top of each other, one after another, all the way to the basement, the progressive collapse, the pancaking, the floors punching through, exactly as structural engineers would later describe it. The deafening crash, it interrupted the city landscape, normal afternoon traffic, pedestrians, business as usual. Then, chaos. When Battalion Chief Robert Thompson arrived at 4:22 p.m., the scene exceeded his worst expectations. The center section of the building, just gone, the initial failure point clearly visible, where the third-floor girder had dropped, where the pier had collapsed. 3 floors compressed down to maybe 15 feet of rubble, the collapse sequence evident in how the debris lay, cars from the roof, now at ground level, cars from the third floor, crushed beneath, cars from the second floor, buried deepest. The structural overload, the critical load path failure, the void formation where the pier used to stand, all visible to trained eyes. The perimeter unreinforced load-bearing walls, still standing, barely, leaning inward, severe cracking visible, the poorly integrated party wall between 57 Ann Street and the Pace University building, separated, damaged, ready to fail. This was textbook buckling failure, progressive collapse, self-weight failure, everything structural engineers warn about. And it had happened in seconds. We immediately established a collapse zone, 200 feet. Nobody gets close. The structural fears were immediate, this old building undergoing what appeared to be catastrophic self-deconstruction, the widespread area of effect, adjoining buildings at risk. We had witnesses saying people were inside, family members arriving, asking about their loved ones, and we couldn't go in, too dangerous. That's the nightmare, knowing someone might be alive in there, and you can't reach them. FDNY Chief of Operations John Esposito made the critical decision. First responders were pulled back, no interior operations, the building was completely unstable, any rescue attempt could trigger secondary collapse, could kill more people. We deployed our robot dog into the building, they were able to give us video inside, and then we were able to fly drones inside, to conduct an assessment, and conduct searches. The robot dog, the DigiDog, Boston Dynamics Spot, painted like a Dalmatian, it could go where humans couldn't. Into the unstable debris field, under precarious structural elements, through voids in the rubble, with cameras, sensors, thermal imaging. It was the first time FDNY used this technology in a structural collapse, and it proved invaluable. The robot located Willis Moore, Tuesday evening, in the rubble, on what used to be the second floor, now compressed to ground level. The thermal signature confirmed he wasn't alive, body temperature already dropping. But they still couldn't reach him, the building, too unstable. NYPD Emergency Services Unit arrived, Lieutenant Maria Santos coordinated with FDNY. We had specialized rescue equipment, confined space gear, structural collapse training, but the engineers, they weren't clearing us to enter. The party wall, the shared wall between the garage and Pace University, it had separated by 6 to 8 inches, leaning, under stress, ready to fail. Any vibration, any additional load, any rescue operation, could bring it down. And if that wall failed, the Pace building could be compromised, more people at risk, a bad situation becoming catastrophic. So we waited, monitored, prepared, while Willis Moore's body lay in the debris. NYC Emergency Management Commissioner Zachary Iskell arrived to coordinate the multi-agency response. Right now, We're transitioning to how we safely take down that building, and it's incredibly complex. There's over 50 cars on the roof. The building is not structurally sound. Safety right now is our #1 priority. We are working very hard right now to ensure the stability of the surrounding structures as we proceed with the demolition. The fears of secondary collapses, they weren't theoretical. Engineering assessments identified immediate hazards everywhere. The roof girder, partially collapsed but still bearing some load, could drop completely at any moment. The remaining brick load-bearing piers, compromised, cracked, weakened. How many others had been undermined during the unpermitted repairs? The floor girders, twisted, bent, supporting debris they were never designed to carry. The concrete-encased steel beams, exposed steel beams visible where concrete had spalled away, rusted reinforcement, moisture exposure damage, decades of deterioration, now under stress they couldn't handle. This wasn't just one building's problem, this was revealing a systemic issue. Council member Christopher Marte arrived at the scene. He represented this district. These were his constituents. We're going to keep on working with the Department of Buildings to make sure that buildings that do have violations, that are just closed, that we really follow up and keep these agencies accountable. But it was too late for Willis Moore. The evacuation orders spread. Pace University, the building at 161 William Street, evacuated immediately. The poorly integrated party wall, the structural fears, the building was deemed unstable. Students who lived there, displaced, their belongings inside, they couldn't go back. The building at 33 Beekman Street, another PACE facility, partially evacuated, 5 residential rooms on the south facade of the 3rd floor, taken offline as a precaution. Classes cancelled, the entire New York City campus, students sent home, finals approaching, spring semester disrupted. The residential students, they needed accommodations. Where do you put hundreds of college students, on short notice, during exam season? Neighboring buildings on Ann Street, vacate orders, residents evacuated, businesses closed. Vichy Travalos lived on Ann Street. She was allowed back in her apartment Thursday to grab essentials, left her dog when she left for her overnight work shift. Then, the vacate order was extended. They're not letting residents in. They haven't notified residents that they're not going to be allowed to go into their homes to collect other living things. My dog is in there. Angelina Ramsey and her family were allowed back in Thursday, spent the night in their apartment. Overall it was calm, minus the fact they were like, we might turn off your electricity and gas, but we don't know for sure, so it was just frustrating. The city is worried about the danger that adjacent buildings could collapse, the aftermath expanding, the widespread area of effect growing. New York City subway services slowed on several lines, the A, C, J, Z, 2, 3 trains, running at reduced speed near the collapse site. Why? The vibrations, the ground disturbance, could they have affected subway tunnels, track stability, infrastructure integrity? Nobody knew, so they slowed down, better safe than catastrophic. The American Red Cross set up immediate relocation assistance for displaced residents, emergency housing, food, basic necessities. The New York City Sheriff's Office, 6 of their vehicles were parked in the garage at the time of the collapse. Official vehicles, seized vehicles awaiting auction, evidence vehicles, all now crushed, buried, potentially destroyed. The logistics nightmare was just beginning. The FDNY deployed something new, something they'd never used in a structural collapse before. A robotic dog, Boston Dynamics Spot, painted like a Dalmatian, nicknamed Spot by the firefighters. The robot could go where humans couldn't, into unstable spaces, under precarious debris, with cameras, sensors, looking for victims. It was the first time the FDNY used this technology in a real collapse, and it proved invaluable. The robot located Willis Moore's body, Tuesday evening, hours after the collapse. But they couldn't recover him. The building was too unstable, the debris too precarious. Any attempt at recovery could trigger secondary collapse. They had to wait until demolition crews could stabilize the remaining structure, until engineers said it was safe. Willis Moore's body remained in the rubble overnight into Wednesday. His family knew, his friends knew, he was dead, crushed in the collapse, but they couldn't bring him home. The demolition planning, it was extraordinarily complex. You couldn't just bring in a wrecking ball, couldn't use explosive demolition. This required surgical precision, careful deconstruction, one piece at a time. Engineers from the Department of Buildings conducted detailed structural assessments, using LAR scans, 360-degree photography, laser measurement systems. They mapped every crack, every displaced beam, every unstable element, creating a digital model of the damage. The findings, alarming. The party wall, separated by 8 inches from the pace building, under enormous lateral stress. If it failed, the pace building's structural system could be compromised. Solution: temporary shoring, massive steel braces, hydraulic supports, holding the wall in position while demolition proceeded. That work alone took 2 days. The roof, over 50 SUVs still parked up there, each weighing 4,000 to 6,000 pounds, total load, maybe £250,000. Sitting on a partially collapsed roof structure, supported by compromised girders and columns. Those vehicles had to be removed, one by one, using crane operations, while the structure beneath them could collapse at any moment. But first, they needed access. Demolition crews worked carefully, Wednesday morning, removing sections of the front facade, creating openings for crane access, for debris removal, for recovery operations. Each piece removed, each chunk of concrete cut away, changed the load distribution, changed the stress patterns, could trigger failure. So they monitored, constantly, with sensors, measuring deflection, vibration, movement. Any change, any shift, operations stopped, engineers reassessed, safety first. Wednesday afternoon, nearly 24 hours after the collapse, they finally reached Willis Moore. Demolition crews, working under engineer supervision, carefully removed debris, shored supports, created a stable access path. They recovered his body, treated him with dignity. The FDNY, the medical examiner, everyone understanding, this was someone's father, husband, friend. Willis Moore was taken to the medical examiner's office, for official identification, for determination of cause of death. Though everyone knew, blunt force trauma, crushed under tons of falling concrete and steel. The demolition continued, days, then weeks. Each car, extracted individually, using cranes, grapple equipment, cutting torches when necessary. The insurance companies were already calculating 50 to 90 vehicles, most likely totaled, claims in the millions. State Farm alone would eventually file a subrogation action, seeking $1.5 million for insured vehicle damages. The debris, carefully sorted, documented, photographed, everything was potential evidence. Structural engineers, examining failed components, looking at the brick pier fragments, the crushed bricks, the failed mortar, trying to understand the exact collapse sequence. Materials testing, on recovered samples, concrete strength, mortar composition, brick quality, steel reinforcement condition. Laboratory testing revealed the deteriorating concrete, advanced degradation, the rusted reinforcement, severe corrosion, the weakened support, far below design capacity. The party wall shoring, it remained in place for weeks, while the Pace building underwent its own structural assessment. Engineers found the wall separation had caused cracking in the Pace building, damage to structural connections, potential compromise of floor-to-wall attachments. Pace University made the decision. The building at 161 William Street closed for the rest of spring semester, students couldn't return, classes relocated, exams held elsewhere. The disruption, enormous, but necessary, student safety, non-negotiable. Ann Street itself, the block between William and Nassau Streets, closed for months. Residents displaced, businesses shuttered, the economic impact spreading. A nearby garage, 27 Beekman Street, also examined by Dobb engineers, found to have structural concerns, temporary closure, vehicle owners allowed to retrieve cars under supervision. The investigation was expanding, wider than just 57 Ann Street. How many other garages had similar problems, similar deferred maintenance, similar structural deficiencies? The Department of Buildings launched a massive inspection campaign. His neighbor, Jaden Hurst, spoke to reporters. "My sister was outside walking her dog. She came back in and told me my neighbor had an accident at work. And they did say he passed away from the accident at work. It's honestly a lot to take in." Willis Moore was 59 years old, born in Jamaica, came to New York City when he was 18, started as a mechanic, worked in the parking business for more than 30 years. He'd hired Garfield Panton back in the 1990s. They'd become close friends, worked together for decades. Panton spoke at Moore's funeral. "We always had to patch up the building, take down concrete and patch it back up. Pieces of the building was falling down. But we'd just patch it back up. He knew the building had problems. We all did. But what were we supposed to do? We reported it. We told management. They hired engineers. We thought they were fixing it." Anna Beskin worked at Pace University. She parked at the garage a couple days a week. She knew Willis Moore. "For me, he was a human I genuinely enjoyed interacting with. There was a kindness and an efficiency about him that seemed to make the whole place run smoother, and just nicer. He seemed like a good boss too, based on how he communicated with the workers." Ahmed Scott was a regular customer. He saw Willis Moore every morning. "Every morning I'd see him. When I was leaving that morning, the last time we saw each other, we smiled, waved at each other. We knew we'd see each other in the afternoon, same time, same place. Except, we didn't." 6 other workers were injured in the collapse, 5 hospitalized, 1 refused medical treatment. 1 worker fell from the 2nd floor to the 1st, another was trapped on an upper floor and had to be rescued. All survived. Their names weren't widely published, their stories weren't told. But they lived, and Willis Moore didn't. The difference? Maybe 10 feet. Maybe being in a different part of the building, random chance. The investigation began immediately. Department of Buildings, Department of Investigation, Manhattan District Attorney's Office, FDNY, structural engineers. They needed to know what failed, why it failed, who was responsible. The city hired LERA Consulting Structural Engineers, an independent firm, to conduct a comprehensive forensic analysis. The investigation would take 2 years. 2 years of examining debris, interviewing witnesses, reviewing documents, analyzing engineering drawings, testing materials. The final report, released in April 2025, spanned more than 3,000 pages. And it was damning. Buildings Commissioner Jimmy Oddo announced the findings. The extensive multi-agency investigation into this catastrophic collapse makes one point abundantly clear: this tragedy in the heart of Lower Manhattan was entirely preventable. The reckless direction of these workers to remove bricks from the pier, together with the failure to report the issue to DOB, obtain the required construction permits, and install critical structural shoring, caused this building to come down. We have stringent regulations in our codes intended to prevent collapses like this from occurring, but those regulations aren't keeping anyone safe if they are not being followed. The report identified multiple contributing factors. First, the original construction in 1925, certain load-bearing piers were not properly connected to the adjacent party wall, a design and construction deficiency that made them more vulnerable to deterioration. Second, long-term progressive deterioration, decades of moisture exposure, freeze-thaw cycles, inadequate maintenance, the piers cracked, weakened, lost capacity. Third, flawed engineering assessment, Experian Design Group failed to properly identify the piers as load-bearing, failed to recognize the severity of the deterioration, failed to designate the condition as unsafe. Fourth, unpermitted demolition work, Little Man Parking employees removed load-bearing bricks without permits, without approved engineering plans, without shoring or temporary support. Fifth, failure to stop unsafe work, Experian Design Group engineers witnessed the brick removal on 2 separate occasions, and failed to stop the work, failed to notify DOB, failed to communicate the urgency of the situation. Sixth, inadequate communication, when the Experian project manager told workers to, quote, put the bricks back, he didn't communicate urgency, didn't explain the immediate danger, didn't order evacuation. And finally, building overload, the roof was loaded beyond its intended capacity, with heavier modern vehicles, exceeding the 1957 Certificate of Occupancy limitations. Any one of these factors might have been manageable. All of them together, fatal. Deputy Mayor for Operations Jeff Roth issued a statement. The tragedy at Ann Street reminds us that every time unpermitted work occurs, it could literally lead to loss of life. But the question everyone wanted answered: would there be criminal charges? The Manhattan District Attorney's Office reviewed the case, the 3,000-page report, the witness testimony, the evidence, and declined to prosecute. No criminal charges were filed against the property owners, against Little Man Parking, against Experian Design Group, against anyone. The determination, while the actions were reckless, negligent, and directly caused the death of Willis Moore, they didn't rise to the level of criminal intent. It was, according to prosecutors, preventable human error, not criminal conduct. That decision, it infuriated Willis Moore's family. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit in April 2024, exactly 1 year after the collapse, against the property owners, against Little Man Parking, against Experian Design Group, against everyone involved. The lawsuit alleged the defendants knowingly ignored structural violations, prioritized cost-cutting over safety, allowed unpermitted repairs without engineering oversight, failed in their duty to maintain a safe workplace. And because of these failures, Willis Moore didn't come home that night. The lawsuit continues. As of this recording, no settlement, no trial date, just legal proceedings grinding forward. 2 injured survivors also filed personal injury lawsuits, citing failure to supervise the demolition of load-bearing masonry. A class action suit was initiated by vehicle owners whose cars were damaged, seeking compensation for destroyed property. State Farm Insurance filed a subrogation action, seeking $1.5 million for insured vehicle damages. All predicated on alleged mismanagement and neglect of known deterioration. The civil penalties, those came faster. The Department of Buildings issued 7 civil violations to the property owners, 57 Ann Street Realty Associates. Fines, correction orders, penalties. But no criminal charges, no jail time, no personal accountability. DOB also issued a commissioner's order. Any parking structure inspections in New York City associated with Experian Design Group or Little Man Parking must undergo third-party review from an independent engineering firm before DOB will accept them. That's significant. That's saying, we don't trust you anymore. Your work requires oversight. DOB conducted enforcement sweeps of all parking structures associated with Little Man Parking and Experian Design Group, over 100 unique locations. Looking for similar problems, similar violations, similar disasters waiting to happen. And they found them. Shortly after the Ann Street collapse, the Department of Buildings conducted city-wide inspections of parking structures. They found 61 parking garages immediately hazardous. 61 improperly maintained, poor structural condition, unsafe for operation. In late April, 4 additional garages in Manhattan and Brooklyn closed for posing an immediate threat to public safety. By May 2023, several dozen garages with similar problems to 57 Ann Street identified. The system had failed, not just at one building, at dozens, maybe hundreds. In November 2023, another parking garage, one built over Amtrak's West Side line, was found to have similar structural issues. That discovery disrupted Empire Service rail operations, while engineers assessed whether the garage could collapse onto the tracks. The regulatory response, it came fast. The New York City Council passed new legislation in May 2024, amending Local Law 126 of 2021. Enhanced parking garage safety protocols, including structural checks every 4 years instead of 6, doubled penalties for violations, mandatory third-party reviews for certain conditions, automatic closure provisions for immediate hazards. The Department of Buildings established a new enforcement unit, $4.7 million budget, dedicated to proactive enforcement. Finding and stopping unsafe construction operations before potential collapse. The unit, expected to begin operations later in 2025. Will any of this prevent the next collapse? Time will tell. But here's what we know for certain. The system failed Willis Moore. Professional engineers, licensed to practice structural engineering, looked at a load-bearing pier, and somehow didn't recognize it as load-bearing. They watched, as workers dismantled it, and didn't stop them. They received a photograph, showing the damage, and responded with, "Put the bricks back," without communicating urgency. Regulatory inspections, scheduled but not yet performed. The garage was 9 months away from its first inspection under the new law. 9 months. Would that inspection have caught the problem? Probably. An inspector walking through, seeing workers removing bricks, seeing a gaping hole in a pier, that should trigger immediate action. But the timing, the bureaucratic schedule, it lined up wrong. Building violations, accumulated over decades, 64 citations since 1976, some resolved, some defaulted, some ignored. The system relied on building owners to self-report problems, to comply voluntarily, to fix violations in their own time. And when they didn't, when they deferred maintenance, when they patched instead of repaired. The enforcement mechanism, fines, more violations, correction orders. Until eventually, the building came down. And someone died. Willis Moore, he was doing his job, managing a parking garage, a job he'd done for 30 years, a job he knew inside and out. He saw the problems, he reported them to management, he texted photographs to the engineers, he asked, "Is this okay?" And the engineers said, "Put the bricks back," not, "Evacuate immediately," not, "This building is about to collapse." Just, put them back. And 1 hour later, Willis Moore was dead. The final insult, the complete failure of accountability. No criminal charges, no one going to jail, no personal responsibility. Just civil violations, fines, regulatory changes, promises that next time will be different. But Willis Moore doesn't get a next time. His family doesn't get him back. His friends at the garage, they don't see him every morning anymore. Ahmed Scott, he doesn't get to wave at Willis Moore in the afternoon, same time, same place. Because the engineering firm made an incorrect assumption. Because workers followed bad instructions. Because communication failed. Because professional oversight failed. Because the regulatory system failed. Because everything that was supposed to prevent this failed. The investigation was expanding, wider than just 57 Ann Street. How many other garages had similar problems, similar deferred maintenance, similar structural deficiencies? The Department of Buildings launched a massive inspection campaign. Within days, inspectors were deployed to parking structures across all 5 boroughs, looking for spalling concrete, cracked brickwork, exposed steel beams, rusted steelwork, signs of long-term progressive deterioration. The results shocked everyone. 61 parking garages, immediately hazardous, citing him as improperly maintained, poor structural condition, unsafe for public use. 61, in a city with over 1,000 parking structures. These weren't minor violations, cosmetic issues, these were buildings at risk of collapse, ticking time bombs, real eye-openers about the state of infrastructure. 4 additional garages, in Manhattan and Brooklyn, closed in late April, posing immediate threat to public safety. The unsafe condition designations, they came fast. Finally, after 57 Ann Street, Dobb wasn't taking chances. One engineer, speaking to reporters, said the garage inspection process could have saved lives if it had occurred earlier. Could have, should have, would have. But didn't. By May 2023, several dozen garages with similar problems to 57 Ann Street identified. Similar problems meant brick load-bearing piers with severe cracking, concrete-encased steel columns with deteriorating concrete, spalling concrete exposing rusted reinforcement, structural violations dating back decades, building code violations unresolved. The root cause analysis revealed systemic issues. In November 2023, another parking garage, this one built over Amtrak's West Side Line in Manhattan, found to have similar structural issues. That discovery disrupted Empire's service rail operations. Engineers had to assess, could the garage collapse onto the tracks? Could a building failure destroy critical rail infrastructure? Trains were halted, passengers delayed, economic disruption spreading. This wasn't just about parking garages anymore. This was about aging urban infrastructure, deferred maintenance across entire systems, a citywide problem. Mayor Eric Adams addressed the media. There's an investigation into exactly what happened here, and making sure there's something we could put in place to prevent something like this from happening. But the damage was done. Willis Moore was dead, public confidence shattered, every old parking garage now viewed with suspicion. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg opened a criminal investigation. His office would spend 2 years reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, consulting structural engineers. The 3,000-page report from LERA Consulting Structural Engineers, that became the centerpiece, the damning report that laid it all out. Every failure, every missed opportunity, every moment where intervention could have prevented tragedy. The report's findings about the original 1925 construction were particularly troubling. During the initial construction, certain load-bearing piers were not properly connected to the adjacent party wall, a design and construction deficiency that violated the 1916 building code in effect at the time. These piers, they should have been integrated into the party wall, tied in structurally, providing lateral stability, load distribution, redundancy. Instead, they stood alone, freestanding columns, carrying concentrated loads, with inadequate structural support. For 98 years, these piers operated with a fundamental design flaw, a structural deficiency built in from day one. And over decades, long-term progressive deterioration made it worse. Moisture exposure damage, water infiltrating through cracks, freezing, expanding, the freeze-thaw cycles, breaking down mortar, cracking bricks, creating void formations. The rusted reinforcement, any metal ties, any steel elements, corroding, expanding, creating internal stress, spalling the concrete. Buckling risk, increasing year by year, as capacity diminished, as loads remained constant or increased. The building, it was dying slowly, weakening incrementally, approaching critical load path failure. And nobody stopped it. The report identified a 2010 engineering report, commissioned by the building's owner, that found issues with the roof and ceiling. 2010, 13 years before the collapse. What happened to that report? What were the findings? Were repairs recommended? Were they performed? The investigation couldn't determine. The documentation was incomplete. The building's owner, 57 Ann Street Realty Associates, controlled by brothers Alan and Jeffrey Hennick, they weren't talking. Or more accurately, their lawyers weren't letting them talk. The civil enforcement actions, they piled up. 7 violations issued to the property owners, 4 unpermitted structural alterations, failure to safeguard the site, failure to maintain structural integrity, failure to obtain required permits, failure to report unsafe conditions. But these were civil violations, oath violations, administrative penalties, fines, correction orders. Not criminal charges, not jail time. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office after 2 years of investigation, after reviewing the 3,000-page report, after consulting experts. Declined to prosecute. No criminal charges against the property owners, against Little Man Parking, against Experian Design Group, against anyone. The determination, while the actions were reckless, negligent, and directly caused Willis Moore's death, they didn't rise to the level of criminal intent. It was preventable human error, not criminal conduct. That decision, it destroyed Willis Moore's family. Subscribe if you want to keep following these investigations into how institutions fail, how warnings go ignored, how preventable disasters become inevitable. Because 57 Ann Street, that wasn't the last building with structural problems. That wasn't the last parking garage operating beyond its capacity. That wasn't the last time engineers will make incorrect assumptions. The investigation report, 3,000 pages, it makes recommendations, changes to regulations, enhanced enforcement, better training. But the fundamental problem remains. We have a system where building owners can defer maintenance indefinitely, where structural problems accumulate over decades, where violations pile up without meaningful consequences. Until something breaks. Until someone dies. And then, we investigate, we write reports, we make recommendations, we promise to do better. Until the next collapse, the next Willis Moore, the next preventable tragedy. The robotic dog that found Willis Moore's body, it was painted like a Dalmatian, nicknamed Spot, first time the FDNY used it in a structural collapse. The technology worked perfectly, located the victim, provided visual confirmation, helped guide recovery efforts. The technology worked. But the humans, the engineers, the inspectors, the regulators, the system, they failed. And Willis Moore paid the price. That's the story of 57 Ann Street, New York City, April 18, 2023. A 98-year-old parking garage, with decades of violations, with cracking piers, with deferred maintenance. Professional engineers hired to fix it, who incorrectly assumed steel columns existed, who watched unpermitted demolition, who failed to stop dangerous work. Workers following instructions, removing bricks, not knowing they were dismantling the building. And Willis Moore, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, trusting that the professionals knew what they were doing. They didn't. And he died. The final image, from the investigation report, shows the pier, after partial excavation from the rubble. You can see the gaping hole, where bricks were removed, the void formation, the crushed mortar, the failed structure. And you can see how obvious it was, how clearly compromised, how visibly dangerous. Any engineer looking at that should have known, immediately, evacuate the building. But they didn't. They said, put the bricks back. And Willis Moore died waiting.